Hello writer friends, and welcome back to another world building vlog. As you can see, I am out in what feels like the middle of nowhere because it is the only quiet place that I can come out and video. My bedroom is taken, the living room is taken, the dining room is taken, the bedroom is taken because I live in a camper. So I am taking a few minutes outside. Real quick intro if you are new here, just so you know, hi, I'm Joanna G. Holden and I am a fantasy author. Obviously, the videos on this channel revolve around fantasy, world building, series writing, but also around mommy author life and around the self-publishing journey because I am a mommy author and I am a self-published author. So if any or all of that sounds good to you, be sure to like this video so that YouTube will recommend it to more people like you who would be interested in it, and click the subscribe button and the notification bell to keep the videos fresh in your feed and to help support the channel. Today's video is going to be part vlog, part tutorial on world building history for fantasy. I wanted to keep it a little bit more relaxed, partially because I don't have a formal place to sit down and give you all the tutorial, but also because I feel like the more that I do of world building for Project Coastlander, which is high fantasy, the more I realize just how messy the whole process is. And so I feel like it'd be easier to show you in some respects than like I can sit down and give you like a list of the order that I'm kind of sort of doing things, but you'd have to take it with a grain of salt because a lot of it happened out of order. A lot of it was back and forth between different steps. Not necessarily backtracking, just continuously changing what I was working on. And that's just kind of how world building is. It is relatively linear, but you never know what you're going to be inspired for. You never know what research is going to give you ideas for, so you kind of just have to go with it sometimes. I realized when I was prepping to do this video that I actually kind of skipped a step in the workbook that I put together, which is a free downloadable workbook that I have in the description box below if you're interested. I put everything in order of how it would be easiest to do, and I realized that the reason that I didn't do the magic systems and the fantasy races and creatures was because I did those last year. Like, I worked on them. I had already decided on them years ago, actually, and then I had finished developing them as of last year. So I wasn't in the middle of working on them. So when I did the geography, like, I was right in the middle of doing that. And now that I'm doing history, I'm right in the middle of it. So it's easier to make a video about. So the how-to part of the video. I think the way that I'm going to end up doing this is I'm going to tell you here now in the outside where it's nice and peaceful and quiet what the order is that I've kind of done the steps, and then I will intersperse during editing video footage of me actively doing it and talking you through what I'm working on currently. So a couple of disclaimers in here then. The first will be that there are going to be tons of spoilers from my world in this video. Like, I'm going to be showing you the world that I'm creating without going into great detail, obviously, but you're going to be seeing big chunks of my world history, of my races and creatures, of magic systems, and so on and so forth. But none of it is story sensitive, so please don't feel like, if for some reason you really were desperate not to know anything about my stories before you read them, which I don't think is the case, but just be aware of that. But nothing that I'm going to be showing you is story sensitive. The second thing is that I have done the majority of this work in the Campfire Pro program, which is no longer available. The version that I bought of Campfire, I bought last summer when it first came out. Since then, they have come out with the new offline and online version, and I got that as well. And I did switch over my files to see how it looked. Most of it worked seamlessly, but how the timeline was set up, it didn't work to move all of the pieces that I had already put into the new files. So I'm just going to continue working on it in Campfire Pro. Just be aware that that is no longer the formatting that is available. So if you're looking to copy my exact process, like as far as the actual bullet pointing that I'm using, it's going to look different because what I have is no longer available. The third disclaimer, and I feel like this is honestly more of a trigger warning for fearful authors. There's a huge debate right now about, in the fantasy author community, about how much world building is too much and how much is too little. And what you're going to see in this video is me going way overboard on the history. Like, a lot more detail in history than a lot of people would consider is necessary, and yet there are other authors that I'm sure would consider it just the tip of the iceberg. Be assured that this is not something that is completely necessary to every author or to every story. I do not do this with every book that I write, but there are some stories that I feel need it, and as someone who loves history anyway, this is like one of my favorite parts. So I actually enjoy this part. Like, it is still work to a degree, but it is work that I'm more than happy to do because A, the story needs it, and B, I am in love with the process. So you do what works for you, take inspiration as you need it, leave everything that you don't need out of your process, and yes, let's let that be. So the first part of the history process for me is the documenting of brainstorming. So just taking out pieces of paper or hopping into a Google Doc or Microsoft Word and just dumping out all of the ideas that I already know that I want for history. For me, when I first started, there was a couple of things that I knew needed to take place because they were going to tie in with the story later. Now, I do find it hilarious that since that original brain dump, like, the story changed enough that I actually did not need those specific events anymore. So I actually ended up changing things, which is not abnormal for me. But that was the very first step, was just putting in these little bullet points or full narratives, depending on what it was, of things that I knew needed to happen. And then rearranging them into the order that I felt like they were probably going to go. After that, I decided how many years I wanted the history to span, which in my case was 12,000, which is a lot of years, but it's also something that, again, worked for the story. Once I figured out how many years, I decided to put in some markers for dividing up that big, giant chunk of time into smaller chunks of time that would be easier for me to fill, but also easier for me to reference as the author later on in the stories. If they need to talk about it, they can say that X, Y, and Z happened in this era or in this era. Marking each of those dividers with specific events that would make it easier for me as the author to go back and remember them by. Then once that happened, I just went back to the very beginning of the world, and I went through with a very, very general world history, again, of bullet points that I knew needed to happen. And then I went back and I started, once I had kind of figured out the general line of things in the order that they needed to and within the eras that I had set up, I went back and I started going in more detail and fleshing out the histories, fleshing out. And in this one, it was focusing on civilizations, the rise and fall of different civilizations and where different peoples moved, how magic worked and all of that. I did at one point have to go back because I realized I had gone through several thousand years worth of history and realized that I had never figured out the history of magic, which was crucial to the whole story. So I had to go back to the beginning and flesh things out again with magic in mind because I had completely forgotten it. That has been a recurring theme for me in writing history, is me using real world history as kind of like a compass to help me make sure that things go the way that it actually would in real life, and completely forgetting, oh wait, but there's magic. So I've had to regularly go back and put the magic back in and remember, like, this is how it actually happened, and in some cases coming up with whole new threads of history that came about because I remembered there was magic. That's where I am right now, is in the fleshing out of the civilizations and the rise and fall of different peoples and leaders and different fantasy races and fantasy creatures and all the magic. That's where I'm right in the middle, literally right in the middle. I am sitting in the middle of the history timeline at the 6,000 year mark, which is right about the halfway point of the entire 12,000 years. And right about that time, about 6,137 years, is when a major world-changing event based off of the magic takes place that changes everything and resets all the civilizations immensely. It would be like if there was an ice age in the 1800s that set us back to the Middle Ages, basically, technology-wise and so on. So I'm right at the events leading up to that event, even though the two events are not necessarily connected. And then what I'm hoping to do this coming week is dive into the second half of history, which will more correlate specifically to the story. So right now the threads have been mostly setting up the world, setting up the peoples, setting up some of the magical orders and so on that will affect that second half of history. The second half of history is going to be what directly affects the story, which is very exciting, the fact that I am this close to actually beginning plotting out the story and figuring out all of the external forces that are affecting the storyline and the characters. That is that is very exciting. So I'm currently in the bullet point rearranging process. I am literally right at the halfway point in history, right at about 6,000 years. And I am rearranging all of the bullet points of history that I had all collected in one giant spot out into the actual order that they need to take place based on the years in which they took place. I had originally just for each era had all of the events kind of just put wherever, just to get them out. But now that I'm going back through and fleshing things out, it is way confusing if I don't first go in and organize all the bullet points that I already have into that order. And so I put in dividers inside each era of 1,000 years each so that I can just kind of look at a glance and see where everything fits in. It is so much better, so much better. I'm really excited right now. I'm in the middle of working on the rise and fall of the Nians. They have this big golden age during the late 5,000s, early 6,000s, and then they have a very quick, very sudden decline, more of like a spiraling out of control than necessarily like losing power, right before a massive event that marks the kind of the halfway point in history that people look back on in this world as like the big moment in history where there was, the first half of history and then the second half of history. Similar to how we would kind of, the Judeo-Christian marker of, Christ's birth and Christ's life as being kind of that same benchmark in our history. So you can see here I have some things that like are set in order and then some things that are just like all over, and then others that I had brought over from previous eras because it wasn't supposed to happen yet. And then just a bunch that's it's just all over the place. And it gets even worse when you get down here. So all of this is perfectly organized by year, and then things start to get less organized when you get down in here. So that's what I'm working on tonight. Also, I originally looked this ambient mix up as a joke, but it is actually really fun to listen to. So this is what I'm listening to in the background as I create my own Age of Empires. Ah! Another element to consider in this is the research. That is something that I have been doing off and on, and honestly not as consistently as I would like. But I've been doing enough of it that I've been able to not just draw inspiration from real world history, but also go back and check things and be like, oh, I came up with this thing that happened, whether this rebellion or, this form of government or this money currency, which we'll talk about that someday. And then to go back in history and see like, oh yeah, they actually did this then, and they did this then, and they did it then too. So it's like, it kind of gives some validity to the ideas that you have while also giving you further ideas for things to explore. Not even to like copy and paste what's happened in history, but to get to think about additional elements of your history that you might not think of if you're just sitting there writing things down. I'm currently reading through the Iranian history, which has been very fascinating. In particular, the Persian Empire and kind of how that kickstarted a lot of the ancient civilizations that we know, like Greece and Rome. And the Persian Empire was a huge influence, and it was honestly quite fascinating. But all of the lists of these different empires and dynasties that I will be drawing a lot of inspiration. It gives me a lot of different things to think about. I also have books on the histories of ancient or of East Asia, histories of the period of exploration and colonialism, which is something I'm going to be exploring some in the stories themselves. So I have lots of different sources of questions that I can ask and elements to pursue and things that I need to take into consideration when forming empires or colonialism or, the military or all these different things. I also, of course, do the random Google searches of things that just pop into my head as, ooh, this could be cool. Has this been done before? The thing about the money, the currency. My daughter was pretending playing store one day and came up with this, what I thought was a very fascinating currency source, because she didn't have any play money. And I totally stole her idea, and someday I will credit her for it and I will pay her for it. But I was able to look up, okay, what kind of currencies are there out there that we would consider weird now, but were considered normal at the time. I think my favorite so far would have to be either the tea bricks in the Mongol Empire or the Parmesan wheels in Italy. One of the two. Those were just, I get those. Like, they're straight up food barter. I would trade a lot for tea and cheese. I think maybe I'll have an empire built off of the currency of chocolate. That would be very understandable. So that's another thing to consider going into history, is that you don't always have to come up with all of the material from scratch yourself. Once you've kind of set up your civilizations and you know who the players are, read some history books. Grab a textbook. My favorite thing to do is to grab a textbook that covers the broad picture of a large chunk of time, and then find individual events and people and elements of history, whether it be medicine or military or scientific developments or religion, and deep dive into those elements and do research, and then it'll give you questions to ask and things to consider. And again, it's not a copy and paste method. It's honestly a lot of fun, and as a history buff, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole process.
Also, for those of you that also have children, be aware, if you leave your notes out, they may end up as artwork, paper airplanes, yeah.
One thing that has me really excited to continue with the world building in history, as detailed as I am, is the idea that I could potentially, in the future, pull limitless ideas for future series and spin-offs and standalones just from this 12,000 years worth of history. And if I end up writing the current series, to the point where I had an actual fandom, then that is something that I could explore in the future. So I feel like all of this work that I'm putting into history, all of these events that I'm coming up with, and the ebb and flow of civilizations and the magic and all of it, I think that it's honestly really worth it. Aside from just being able to create realistic and interesting external conflicts for the current series, to also have all of these options for the future, for more series, for more standalones, for all of these books about events that I honestly think would be really fascinating to explore. Obviously, I still have a myriad of other stories and worlds that I want to explore, but it's just something that I think is a cool, what's the right word? It's like an extra benefit to being able to do all of this seemingly excessive world building, is this idea that I have options for the future. If I decide not to go with any of the other worlds that I've already kind of got in the back of my mind, if I want to just stick with what I've got, I have plenty of material to work with. So that's also something to consider. Once I'm done with the overall world history, the next thing that I would like to do is to copy and paste these bullet points that I've made. With some of them have a lot of detail, some of them hardly have any, fit them into Google Doc or Microsoft Word files in a more narrative flow. The first one will be just an overall world history, just have it all in one place, printed off where I can read through it as I need to. The second file is going to be divvied up into individual fantasy races, so I can kind of see, what the elfin have been up to forever, or what the Naiads have been up to here and there, or humans, and so on and so forth. And I may do one for magical creatures if I have enough events to actually make one up. I will also probably throw in some of the magical orders and kind of what happened with them throughout history and how they fit in. And then the next step after sorting through the general history will be going in and doing a deep dive, detailed history of the last 2,000 to 3,000 years surrounding the central continent, which is the place that the story actually takes place in. And some of these small pockets of civilization around the world that also affects the story. But this is like the meaty part that actually is going to set up all of the external conflicts and adventures that are going to take place throughout the story. After that, it's pretty much down to personal histories, family histories, individual cities, and how everything, basically setting up how everything is in the courts, among the working people, in the magical societies, all of those things. And then after that, I am done. It sounds like a lot, it is a lot, but it's actually not going to take as long as it sounds. I am on track right now. This is the middle of February as I'm recording this, and I am on track right now to finish the general history by the end of the month. Then spend the month of March divvying things up into those files and kind of setting things up so that come May, because I will be skipping April so that I can enjoy Camp Nano with a surprise project that I'll be announcing soon. So that I can spend May doing the deep dive history. May and June will probably be deep dive histories and setting things up so that, again, skipping July for Camp Nano, in August I can begin deep diving on languages and cultures and, again, going back over geography and naming things, because I have gone over the topography of history. I have not figured out where all the current cities and civilizations are because I'm not there in history yet. And that's why, again, it's really more like a bouncing back and forth kind of deal. Like, it's not always strictly linear because you don't always have all the pieces. You kind of have to go back. It's like having 5 puzzles and having to go back and forth because all of the puzzle pieces came in one bag. That's pretty much what it is. So that is it. That is my history process. And hopefully what you have seen combined with this very basic step-by-step-ish tutorial will give you some inspiration for building your worlds. As I said at the beginning, this is entirely optional. Not everyone needs to build history at all, let alone to these lengths. And at the same time, if you feel like your story needs even greater detail and even greater attention, then go for it. Like I know people who have come up with full mythologies and full like legends and all of these characters that are going to be referenced throughout the stories and stuff that I don't necessarily need to the same degree. And there are others who just don't need it. They don't either have 12,000 years worth of history, or they just don't need that much history to be able to figure out what's going on in their world and where everyone is and so on and so forth. This is what works for me. As an author, I work best if I start at the beginning and I see where everybody is, rather than attempting to just make things up and spread up, because this is what I did the first time that I attempted writing Project Coastlander. I set up a map, I scattered random peoples and creatures across it, but then I didn't have enough ideas to be able to flesh it out and finish it for the story, because I work best starting at the beginning and figuring things out and watching the domino effect of things, the ripple effect of things. That's how I work best. So you figure out what works best for you, and then you do it the very best that you can. Hello, Mr. Motorcycle. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, again, please hit that like so that YouTube can continue recommending it to people who enjoy it. Make sure that you're subscribed so you can continue to get further updates. And I will hopefully see you very soon again here with another fun writing vlog, maybe a fun silent writing vlog like a write with me. I think that would be fun. I got a lot more content coming up about the fantasy races and creatures, building languages, all of that fun stuff, plus lots more. So yeah, I'm going to leave you guys there. I hope you all have an amazing rest of the weekend, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!